Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at Silicon Valley and all the talk about market volatility there. It's more than just headlines about tech layoffs or housing prices going up and down. We're going deep on this one with a really interesting source, a podcast script all about real estate in the Silicon Valley. And what we found is a pretty fascinating picture. It's not all doom and gloom like some folks might think.
Yeah, you know what struck me is how this isn't your typical Silicon Valley boom and bust cycle. The source actually uses the seesaw analogy, which I thought was really clever. On one side, you've got things like housing prices cooling off a bit, but then there's still this big worry about job security in tech. And on the other side, the valuations of a lot of these tech companies are still sky high, but then venture capital's kind of pulling back. It's like this weird mix of signals, not the usual Silicon Valley story.
I see what you mean. It's like those two sides are balancing each other out somehow.
Yeah.
So how does the seesaw actually work? The source points to the big players, Meta,
Yeah.
Google, Tesla, all making some big adjustments. What's the deal with that?
Right. Well, the source calls it recalibration, and it's way more than just layoffs. These companies are changing how they think about their workforce, what they invest in, their whole direction, really. And when companies this big shift gears, the whole ecosystem feels it. Like, think about Meta and how they're going all in on the metaverse. They had to scale back other projects, which meant job cuts, and those people got to figure out what to do about housing.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. If you're not sure about your job, buying a house in a crazy market like Silicon Valley sounds risky.
Exactly. And then there's another factor the source brings up. The Federal Reserve, they've been raising interest rates to fight inflation, but that doesn't just affect people trying to buy houses. It hits startups too.
So it's like a double whammy: higher mortgage rates for buyers, and startups are paying more to borrow money. No wonder the venture capitalists are being more careful.
Exactly. When borrowing gets expensive, everyone gets a little more cautious. The source points out this stat: venture capital funding dropped 20% in the first half of 2024 compared to 2021. That's a pretty clear sign investors are thinking twice.
Wow, 20%, that's huge. So we've got these internal Silicon Valley things happening, but it's not just that, right? The source also talks about global stuff impacting things too.
Oh, absolutely. Everything's connected these days.
Yeah.
Think about supply chain problems. Like, let's say a key part for the latest gadget is stuck on a ship somewhere. That slows down production, messes with revenue, and could even lead to job cuts back in Silicon Valley. It's all a chain reaction.
Okay, so we've got these big forces at play, but let's get down to brass tacks. How are they actually affecting real estate in Silicon Valley? The source digs into the actual buying and selling and renting, right? What's the story there?
Yeah, they break it down really well. Let's start with home prices. Some areas are seeing prices soften a little, but there just aren't that many homes for sale.
Yeah.
So you might see fewer bidding wars. But finding a place at a good price is still tough. It's a weird situation for both buyers and sellers.
I get it. It's like things are cooling down, but it's not a full-blown buyer's market everywhere. What
Yeah.
about the fancy stuff, the luxury market? What's happening there?
Even the high end is slowing down, which is interesting. Usually those folks kind of insulated from the regular market swings. So this means even the wealthy are hesitant right now, kind of waiting to see what happens next.
It's like everyone's holding their breath a little. And what about rentals? I know the source mentioned they're still hot, but there's a twist, right?
Yeah, there's this interesting link to all those tech layoffs. Instead of buying, people are renting while they figure out their next move. And a lot of these folks who have been buyers in a different market, so that adds another layer to the rental situation.
It's like these ripples from the tech world are changing everything. The source even tells the story about a real estate advisor who's noticing a shift in what their clients want. Instead of going for those risky flips, everyone wants stable, long-term investments. It really shows you how the mood is changing, doesn't it?
Totally. It's like a sign of the times. Investors are getting more cautious. They're not chasing those quick profits anymore. It's all about stability and steady growth over the long haul.
So what does all this mean for someone listening right now? Maybe they're thinking about moving to Silicon Valley or even just moving within the area. The source actually has some advice for different groups: homeowners, buyers, investors, renters.
Oh, yeah. It's really practical stuff, too. Like, for homeowners, thinking about selling, timing is key. They need to look closely at their specific area and be smart about how they price their home.
Right, so even though prices are softening, it's not like you can just throw any number out there and expect a bidding war. What about people who want to buy? Prices might be a little lower now, but...
But those interest rates can really hurt you. The source really emphasizes focusing on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Good schools, Solid infrastructure, access to things you need. Those things hold their value no matter what the market's doing. Location becomes even more important when things are unpredictable.
Makes sense those fundamentals are like a safety net. And for investors, the source has one big word: diversification.
Exactly. Diversification is always important, but especially in a market like this. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. The source actually gives this really timely example that properties tied to new infrastructure, like EV charging stations, there's a lot of money flowing into that area, so it could be a good long-term bet.
So instead of betting on just one thing, you spread your investments around. Smart. Now, what about renters? They're facing a tough market, but the source has a tip for them too, right?
Yeah, and it's a good one. This cooling market could actually give renters some bargaining power. Landlords might be more willing to negotiate on leases or offer some perks to keep tenants. Especially with all those former tech workers now looking for rentals, there's more competition for landlords.
So brush up on those negotiation skills. We've covered a lot, from the big picture stuff, shaking up Silicon Valley, to how it's playing out in the real estate market. But what about the future? The source looks ahead to some key trends we should keep an eye on right now.
They do. And one of the most interesting ones is this idea of a tech resurgence. I mean, Silicon Valley is always innovating, right? The source suggests new technologies will create new opportunities. That's definitely something to watch.
Okay, but what kind of opportunities are we talking about? The source isn't too specific there.
Right. Oh, that's where things get really interesting. We're already seeing cool stuff in AI, clean energy, biotech. These fields could totally change Silicon Valley. They could create whole new industries and jobs. And of course, that'll impact real estate, where people want to live and work will change.
So instead of the social media and smartphone era, maybe it'll be the era of personalized medicine powered by AI, or sustainable cities running on clean energy. And all of that will affect where people want to live and work, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about where, but how. We might see totally new kinds of housing developments designed for remote workers or built around eco-friendly transportation. The possibilities are really exciting.
It's like a whole new chapter starting. The source also talks about interest rates. Will they stabilize, or are we in for more of a roller coaster ride?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure, but markets usually adjust over time. As we get used to these higher rates, things should become a little more predictable. But of course, something could always happen to throw things off.
Speaking of things that could throw things off, the source mentions policy impacts but doesn't really go into detail. What kind of policies should people be watching? The kind of stuff that could really shake things up in Silicon Valley.
There are a few big ones to keep an eye on. At the national level, any changes to taxes or regulations on tech investment could have a huge impact on Silicon Valley. It all comes down to how much money is flowing in and how easy it is to innovate. Then locally, policies about housing affordability and sustainable development will be really important. Those will shape how the region grows and changes. And of course, global stuff, trade deals, international conflicts, all that can impact investment and how confident people feel about the future.
So it's this whole mix of global, national, and local stuff all happening at once.
It is. That's why it's so important to understand the big picture, the current trends, and what might happen in the future. It helps you make sense of this crazy landscape, whether you're a homeowner, a buyer, an investor, or just someone who's fascinated by Silicon Valley.
And going back to that history, the source makes this point about Silicon Valley always reinventing itself. It's a place that thrives on change, even when it feels chaotic.
That's so true. The main takeaway from the source is that this volatility might seem scary, but it also creates opportunities for people who are willing to adapt and try new things.
So instead of being afraid of the roller coaster, we should learn how to ride it.
Exactly. And that's why these deep dives are so valuable. We break down all this information so you can understand what's happening and make smarter decisions.
It's like having a map for this crazy, unpredictable world. So what's the big takeaway here? What should people be thinking about after listening to this?
Well, the source ends by saying, Silicon Valley has always gone through these booms and busts, and each time it leads to new inventions and changes the whole landscape. This time probably won't be any different.
So it's not about predicting the future, it's about being ready for whatever happens.
Exactly. And that leads me to something the source didn't explicitly say, but I think it's really important. How might the culture of Silicon Valley change in this new era where things are less wild and crazy?
That's a great question. We've all heard about that move fast and break things mentality. Will that still be the dominant way of thinking in a market where everyone's suddenly valuing caution and stability?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think we'll see a shift towards more sustainable growth, more emphasis on being resilient and adaptable, maybe more balanced approach where innovation is still important, but so is building things that last.
So maybe instead of chasing the next unicorn, we'll see more companies focused on solving real problems and building for the long term.
I think that's very possible.
Mm.
And as that cultural shift happens, it'll affect everything. Investment, hiring, the kinds of products and services that come out of Silicon Valley.
It's like we're watching the whole ecosystem evolve and mature. And even though there might be less hype and craziness, it could lead to a more balanced and sustainable future for the region.
Absolutely. It shows that change, even when it's disruptive, can ultimately be a good thing. And by understanding what's happening and adapting to the new reality, we can all navigate this exciting and ever-changing world.
Well said. This deep dive has been amazing. We went from understanding the current volatility to speculating about the future of Silicon Valley's culture.
It's fascinating to connect the dots between all these different trends. And the best part is that this is just the beginning. It's a starting point for more exploration and learning.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what's happening in Silicon Valley. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is the key to navigating this crazy market.
And as we wrap up this first part, I want to leave you with this thought. If Silicon Valley is all about reinvention, what role will you play in shaping its future?
That's a really powerful question to think about. It's easy to feel like we're just along for the ride when these big market changes happen. But you're right, individual choices can actually make a difference, especially in a place like Silicon Valley where things are constantly changing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you've already hit on the most important thing, being aware. By taking this deep dive, you're trying to understand what's happening, and that puts you in a much better position to make good decisions. From there, it's all about making sure your actions line up with what you believe in and what you want to achieve.
That makes sense. But let's get practical for a minute. What are some real-world examples of how someone listening could actually make a difference? How can they shape the future of Silicon Valley, even if it's just a small way?
Okay, so let's say you're an entrepreneur. You've got this amazing idea for a new tech startup. Instead of just focusing on disrupting the market and growing as fast as possible, you could also build sustainability into your business plan. Maybe you create an app that helps people reduce their carbon footprint, or your company prioritizes ethical sourcing and manufacturing.
So you're not just building a successful company, you're building one that reflects your values and helps create a more sustainable future. That's a really powerful idea. What about someone who's not an entrepreneur, but maybe an investor?
Well, for investors, it's about looking beyond just how much money they'll make. They can think about the bigger impact of their investments. They can look for companies that are tackling issues they care about, like climate change, social justice, promoting diversity in tech.
I love that. It's about using your money to support companies and projects that are making a positive difference. But what about those of us who aren't entrepreneurs or investors? We still want to be a part of this.
Even if you're not directly involved in tech, your choices still matter. Whether you're a consumer, a voter, a member of your community, it all contributes to the bigger picture. You can support local businesses that align with your values. You can advocate for policies that promote innovation and sustainability. You can even just talk about these issues with your friends and family to raise awareness and spark new ideas.
It's like that saying, think globally, act locally. Even small things can make a difference, especially when we're all working towards the same goal.
Exactly. We're all connected, and our choices, even the ones that seem small, can have a ripple effect.
This is really inspiring. We started by talking about market trends, and now we're talking about how individual choices can shape the direction of a whole region.
And that brings us back to that key idea from the source reinvention. Silicon Valley is always evolving, and we can all choose to be a part of that change, not just watch it happen.
Right. It's like we can either let the current sweep us along, or we can actively swim towards the future we want.
I like that analogy. And who knows? Maybe the next big thing won't come from a huge tech company. Maybe it'll come from a small startup with a bold idea and a mission to make the world better. Or maybe it'll be a community initiative that empowers people to work together for the greater good.
Wow, that's really exciting to think about. This deep dive has been more than just learning information. It's a call to action. It reminds us that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
That's the power of knowledge, isn't it? It gives us the power to act, to create, to make a difference. And as we wrap up this part of our exploration into Silicon Valley's market volatility, I want to leave you with this thought. The future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.
Beautifully said. So, to our listener, as you navigate this crazy, ever-changing world, remember that you have the power to shape the future. One decision, one action, one conversation at a time.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we can all be a part of creating the future we want to see. It's been fascinating exploring all the ups and downs of Silicon Valley. And one thing's for sure, this region is always changing, always in motion.
Definitely always something new happening, which is what makes it so interesting. But as we've been talking about, understanding the bigger trends and forces at play can really help you navigate all that change. You can even use it to your advantage.
For sure. And you know what's really sticking with me? This idea that Silicon Valley isn't just about adapting to change, it's about actively shaping the future.
That's a really important point. And it goes beyond just the tech stuff. It's about changing the whole culture of Silicon Valley, moving away from that grow at all costs mindset. It's about finding a more balanced and sustainable approach. So maybe instead of chasing those billion-dollar unicorns, we'll see more companies focused on building something that lasts. Companies that are solving real problems and creating value for the long term.
Exactly. And that shift will change everything from how companies invest to who they hire. We might see a lot more focus on diversity and inclusion, employee well-being, ethical business practices.
It's exciting to think about what the next version of Silicon Valley will look like. And the best part is we can all be a part of that transformation.
Absolutely. Whether you're an entrepreneur, an investor, a tech worker, or just someone who lives here, your choices matter. Every decision, every action, every conversation can help shape the future of Silicon Valley.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've covered so much ground, from the market volatility to the potential future trends to the cultural shifts that are happening right now.
It's been a really cool journey, and we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore and learn about this place.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some tools to understand these complex issues. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is the best way to navigate this constantly changing world.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.